Julian Croft existed in a world of polished glass and muted steel. His penthouse apartment, perched high above the city, was a monument to success, a testament to a fortune built with cold precision. Each morning, the sun would rise and spill across the minimalist furniture, finding no warmth to reflect, no life to illuminate. It was merely light, just as his life was merely existence. He moved through his days with the same sterile efficiency that defined his surroundings. From the silent glide of the elevator to his corner office, to the hushed reverence of his boardroom, his world was a carefully curated symphony of wealth and power. Yet, inside the fortress of his chest, where a heart was supposed to beat, there was only a hollow echo. A quiet, persistent ache that was the ghost of a memory. The memory of a different life, one filled with laughter, with the scent of his wife's perfume, with the tiny hand of his daughter tucked into his own. That life had been extinguished in a shatter of metal and glass on a rain-slicked road 3 years ago. Since then, Julian had rebuilt his world, but not his soul. He had constructed walls not of brick and mortar, but of routine and detachment. He was a king in a silent castle, haunted by the phantom warmth of a fire long since turned to ash. His weathered face, which looked older than his 38 years, was a mask of stoic control, betraying nothing of the fractured landscape within. The glow of chandeliers in his home felt like an accusation, a brilliant light shining on an empty space. Hundreds of miles away, in a part of the city Julian's limousine never traveled, Clara Evans moved through a world of weary persistence. Her life was a collection of worn-out things, the thin soles of her shoes, the faded fabric of her janitor's uniform, the frayed edges of her patience. Yet, within the cramped confines of her small apartment, a powerful, unwavering light shone. It was the bright, innocent face of her 7-year-old daughter, Lily. Lily was the reason for every sacrifice, the purpose behind every exhausting shift spent pushing a mop across endless tiled floors. Clara's existence was a stark contrast to Julian's. Hers was not an absence of feeling, but an abundance of it. She felt the gnawing worry of an overdue bill, the sharp sting of her child's disappointment over a broken toy she could not afford to replace, and the fierce, protective love that was both her shield and her heaviest burden. She carried herself with a quiet dignity that seemed out of place amidst the smell of disinfectant and the clatter of her cleaning cart. Her hands were calloused from work, but they were gentle when they brushed the hair from Lily's forehead. There was a tiredness in her eyes, but it was a warrior's fatigue, not the hollow emptiness of defeat. She had once dreamed of a different life, a life of books and ancient languages, a passion inherited from a grandfather she barely knew. But those dreams were luxuries, tucked away like old letters, sacrifices laid at the altar of motherhood. For now, survival was her only ambition. One Tuesday, the sky broke open. A cold, relentless autumn rain lashed against the city, turning the streets into slick, dark mirrors. Clara's shift had ended late, and the bus that was supposed to carry her and Lily home was nowhere in sight. They huddled together under the flimsy awning of the bus stop, the wind driving icy needles of water into their clothes. Lily shivered, her small body trembling against Clara's side. Clara wrapped her own thin jacket tighter around her daughter, a futile gesture against the biting cold. A sleek, black car slowed as it approached the curb. It was a vessel from another world, its polished exterior repelling the rain that soaked them to the bone. The back window glided down, revealing a man's face, etched with a severity that seemed to match the unforgiving weather. It was Julian Croft, though they did not know his name. He was on his way home from a meeting that had run long, his mind adrift in the usual gray fog of his thoughts. Then he saw them. The woman, her face pale with cold, shielding the small, shivering child. Something flickered within him. A strange, unfamiliar impulse. It was a faint echo of a man he used to be, a man who would have stopped, a man who would have helped. For 3 years, that man had been dormant, buried under layers of grief and isolation. He did not know why he told his driver to pull over. He did not know why he was rolling down the window, breaking the seal of his sterile, temperature-controlled world and letting the icy air rush in. "You'll be waiting a long time in this weather," he said, his voice rough from disuse in any context outside of business. "Let me give you a ride." Clara looked at the man, at the opulent interior of the car visible behind him. She saw wealth and power, two things that had only ever existed at a great distance from her own life. A knot of pride and caution tightened in her stomach. "Thank you, but we're fine. The bus will be here soon." Lily shivered again, a violent tremor that shook her small frame. The man's gaze softened, the hard lines around his eyes easing for just a moment. The sight of the child's discomfort cracked something inside him, a tiny fissure in the frozen wall around his heart. "Your daughter is freezing," he stated, his tone less of a suggestion and more of a quiet command. He shrugged off his own expensive wool coat. It was dark, heavy, and radiated a warmth that seemed impossible in the frigid night. He pushed it through the window. "At least take this." "For her." Clara hesitated. Accepting help felt like an admission of defeat, a dent in the armor of self-reliance she wore every day. But then she looked at Lily's chattering teeth and blue-tinged lips, and her pride dissolved. She took the heavy coat, its warmth a shocking comfort against her cold hands. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the drumming rain. She wrapped the massive coat around Lily, and her daughter instantly burrowed into its luxurious folds, the shivering subsiding. "We'll be okay," Clara said again, more firmly this time, declining the implicit offer of a ride once more. She would accept this kindness, this shield for her daughter, but she would not step into his world. Julian looked at her for a long moment, at the fierce independence in her eyes, a quiet dignity that the storm could not wash away. He nodded slowly. "All right," he signaled for his driver to move on. As the car pulled away, he watched them in the rearview mirror, a small woman and a child wrapped in his coat, two figures shrinking into the rain-swept darkness. For the first time in years, the hollow space in his chest felt a little less empty. It was filled with a strange, unfamiliar warmth that had nothing to do with the car's heater. Back in the sanctuary of their small apartment, the coat was a foreign object, a piece of another universe. It lay draped over their only armchair, its fine wool and perfect tailoring a stark contrast to their humble surroundings. As Clara helped a now warm and sleepy Lily into her pajamas, she noticed a faint crinkling sound from the coat. She reached into an inner pocket, her fingers closing around a sheaf of folded papers. She pulled them out, expecting a receipt or a business card. Instead, she found a dense, multi-page document. It was not written in English. The script was elegant and angular, a language she had not seen in nearly 20 years, but one she recognized instantly. It was Old Norse, a dead language, the passionate obsession of her late grandfather, a reclusive academic who had taught it to her when she was a little girl. It was a skill she had never used, a piece of a past she had long since put away. Curiosity, a long-dormant feeling, stirred within her. She sat at her small kitchen table, the single bare bulb overhead casting a pool of light on the mysterious pages. She began to read, her mind slowly dusting off the forgotten corners of her memory. The words were difficult at first, like finding a path through a tangled, overgrown forest. But then, it started to come back. The cadence, the grammar, the unique meanings. What she read made a cold dread creep up her spine, a chill that had nothing to do with the lingering dampness of her clothes. It spoke of shell corporations, of offshore accounts, of project codenames, Project Valhalla, Project Bifrost, and meticulously detailed fund transfers. It was a ledger of deceit, a blueprint for a massive financial crime. And then she saw a name, repeated over and over. Croft Enterprises. Julian, meanwhile, could not shake the image of the woman and child from his mind. He sat in his silent penthouse, the city lights twinkling below like a galaxy of distant stars, and felt an uncharacteristic restlessness. He had given away his coat, an act so impulsive and out of character that it puzzled him. But it was not the coat he thought about. It was her eyes. The weariness, the strength, the unwavering dignity. He realized he did not even know her name. He had no way to get his coat back, not that he cared about the coat itself. What bothered him was the loose thread, the unfinished nature of the encounter. He felt a pull, a need to know that they were safe, that they were okay. It was a flicker of connection in his desolate world, and he found himself unwilling to let it go. The next morning, he did something else out of character. He cancelled his morning meetings and drove his own car, not the chauffeured limousine, back to the neighborhood where he had seen them. He felt foolish, driving slowly down unfamiliar streets, not even sure what he was looking for. After nearly an hour, he spotted it, the same bus stop. He parked and waited, a sliver of hope warring with the cynical voice in his head that told him he was wasting his time. He did not have to wait long. He saw her walking down the street, this time without her daughter. She was carrying his coat, neatly folded over her arm. A wave of relief washed over him, so potent it surprised him. He got out of the car as she approached. "I was hoping I'd find you," he said, his voice softer than it had been the night before. Clara stopped, startled to see him. In the harsh light of day, he looked less severe and more tired, the lines on his face speaking of a deep, settled sorrow. "I wanted to return your coat," she said, holding it out. "And to thank you again. My daughter, she was so cold." "Keep it," he said quickly. "Please. It's the least I can do." He saw her hesitate, saw that same flicker of pride in her eyes. "Or, if you won't, at least let me buy you a cup of coffee to thank you for taking the trouble to bring it back." She looked from the coat to his face, and for some reason, she agreed. They went to a small, unassuming cafe nearby, the kind of place Julian had not set foot in for years. The air smelled of burnt coffee and sugar, a world away from the silent, air-filtered hum of his life. As they sat opposite each other in a worn vinyl booth, the awkwardness was palpable. He was a man accustomed to commanding rooms, and she was a woman accustomed to being invisible. "I'm Julian," he said, finally breaking the silence. "Clara," she replied. She clutched her warm mug, her knuckles white. She had to tell him. She had to give him the papers. "There was something in the pocket," she began, her voice low. She slid the folded document across the table. "I think it belongs to you." Julian looked at the papers, a frown creasing his brow. "I've never seen this before." He unfolded it, his eyes scanning the strange script. "What language is this?" "It's Old Norse," Clara said quietly. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You can read this?" "A little." "Enough," she said, choosing her words carefully. "It seems to be financial records. It mentions a company. Croft Enterprises." The name hung in the air between them, heavy and cold. Julian's face became a stony mask. The warmth that had been building between them instantly evaporated, replaced by an icy wall of suspicion. He was no longer just Julian, the kind stranger. He was Julian Croft, the CEO of Croft Enterprises. The man whose company was named in a document detailing criminal fraud. "That's my company," he said, his voice flat. He looked at her, a dozen questions swirling in his gaze. Who was this woman? A janitor who could read a dead language and just happened to find a damning document in the pocket of a coat he had given her by chance. The coincidence was too great to be believed. He saw the fear and confusion in her eyes, and a part of him, the part that had been reawakening, knew she was telling the truth. But the CEO, the man who had built an empire, was wary. "How do I know you didn't put this there?" he asked, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. Clara recoiled as if he had slapped her. The hurt in her eyes was sharp and genuine. "Why would I do that? I don't even know you." She stood up, her quiet dignity now a formidable shield. "I was just trying to do the right thing. To return what was yours." She put a few crumpled dollars on the table for her coffee. "I should go." "Wait," Julian said, standing up. The pain on her face had shattered his suspicion. He saw not a schemer, but the same woman from the bus stop, the one with the fierce, protective spirit. He had wounded her, and the realization brought a sharp, unfamiliar pang of guilt. "I'm sorry. That was uncalled for. Please, sit down." She hesitated, her hand trembling slightly. "Please," he repeated, his voice raw with a sincerity he had not felt in years. "I've been alone for a very long time. I think I've forgotten how to trust people." To his own astonishment, he found himself telling her about the accident, about his wife and daughter. The words came out in a quiet, broken stream, a confession he had not made to anyone. He spoke of the emptiness, of the silence in his large, sterile home. Clara slowly sat back down. She listened, and the anger inside her dissolved, replaced by a profound wave of empathy. She saw him then, not as a billionaire, not as an accuser, but as a man hollowed out by grief. A man as lost in his own way as she was in hers. The chasm between their worlds suddenly seemed smaller. "I'm so sorry," she whispered when he fell silent. Her compassion was a balm on a wound he thought could never be touched. "Someone in my company is hiding something," he said, his gaze returning to the document. "And I think you are the only person in the world who can help me find out what it is." That was the beginning. Their meetings moved from the impersonal cafe to the quiet, dusty aisles of the public library. It was neutral ground, a space that belonged to neither of their worlds. Surrounded by the silent companionship of books, Clara would work, painstakingly translating the angular script while Julian watched, a silent, intense guardian. Lily would often come with them, coloring happily at a small table nearby, her innocent presence a bridge between two people from different universes. Julian was transformed in those quiet hours. He was not a CEO or a mogul. He was just a man, listening as Clara's soft voice gave life to dead words, uncovering a web of deceit woven through the heart of his own legacy. He learned about Project Valhalla, a fraudulent green energy initiative that had siphoned millions of dollars into an untraceable offshore account. He learned of bribes, of falsified reports, of a betrayal orchestrated by someone very high up in his company. But he learned more than that. He learned the cadence of Clara's breathing when she was concentrating, the way she would bite her lip when a particular phrase eluded her. He watched her with Lily, saw the infinite patience and boundless love in her eyes, and it felt like watching the sun rise after a long, frozen night. He found himself buying small gifts for Lily, a new set of crayons, a picture book about stars. Seeing her face light up sent a jolt of pure, uncomplicated joy through him, a feeling he thought had died forever. For Clara, this new proximity to Julian was a disorienting mix of fear and fascination. He was a man of immense power, yet with her and Lily, he was gentle, almost hesitant, as if he were learning to feel again. He would listen, truly listen, when she spoke of her abandoned dreams of being a scholar, of her struggles as a single mother. He never offered pity, only a deep, abiding respect that made her feel seen in a way she never had before. She was not just a janitor to him. She was Clara. One afternoon, as Clara translated a particularly damning section, she looked up and found him staring, his expression one of open, unguarded sorrow. "My wife, she would have liked you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She believed that a person's worth had nothing to do with their bank account. She said kindness was the only true currency." In that moment, the last of Clara's walls crumbled. She saw the real man, stripped bare of his wealth and power, a soul searching for an anchor in a sea of grief. She reached across the table and, for the first time, touched his hand. It was a simple, fleeting gesture, but it was electric. A promise of healing. A spark of connection that was deeper than any document they could ever translate. The truth, when it was finally laid bare, was uglier than Julian could have imagined. The architect of the fraud was Marcus Sterling, his senior vice president, a man he had trusted for over a decade. The document was Sterling's personal ledger, his secret insurance policy, written in a language he believed no one could ever decipher. He must have dropped it, a moment of carelessness that would unravel his entire scheme. Julian now faced a terrible choice. Exposing Sterling would mean exposing his company to a cataclysmic scandal, potentially destroying everything he and his father had built. Keeping it quiet would mean becoming complicit in the very crime that tarnished his family's name. As he wrestled with this, Marcus Sterling began to feel the pressure. He noticed the closed-door meetings, the change in Julian's demeanor, and he grew suspicious of the strange new relationship between his boss and a lowly janitor. Sterling was a man who believed in preemptive strikes. He had Julian and Clara followed. A photographer, lurking in the shadows outside the library, captured a single, damning image: Julian, helping Clara with her coat, his expression tender, while Lily held his hand. It was a moment of innocent affection, but in the hands of a malicious mind, it could be twisted into something ugly. The next morning, the photo was on the front page of every tabloid. The headline screamed, "Grieving Billionaire Croft Consoled by Gold-Digging Janitor." The story painted Clara as a conniving opportunist, a predator who had sunk her claws into a vulnerable, heartbroken man. It mentioned her poverty, her job, her small apartment, all framed as evidence of her desperation. They printed her full name. By noon, a swarm of reporters was camped outside her building. The world crashed down on Clara with breathtaking speed. When she arrived at work, her supervisor fired her, citing the unwanted attention she was bringing. Her landlord gave her an eviction notice, pressured by other tenants. Her quiet, carefully managed life was shattered. People shouted questions at her on the street, cameras flashed in her face. They saw her not as a person, but as a caricature, a villain in a story she did not write. She locked herself and Lily inside their apartment, the sanctuary now a prison. Lily, confused and scared by the angry voices outside, cried in her arms. Clara felt a suffocating wave of shame and terror. She had allowed this man, this world of wealth and intrigue, into her life, and it had destroyed them. When Julian called, his voice frantic with worry, she could barely speak. "Stay away," she finally managed to choke out, the words like shards of glass in her throat. "Please, just stay away from us. You've done enough." "Clara, I can fix this," he pleaded. "I will protect you." "Protect me?" she cried, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "Look what your world has done to us. We were fine before you. We were poor, but we were left alone. Now we have nothing. Just leave us alone." She hung up the phone, her hand trembling. The separation was a physical pain, a tearing away of something that had just begun to heal. She had let herself trust him, let herself believe that the connection between them was real. But the storm of his world had been too powerful, and it had swept her away. She had to protect her daughter. That was all that mattered now. Julian stood in his penthouse, the silence screaming at him. Her words echoed in his ears. "Leave us alone." He looked at the city below, at the world he commanded, and felt utterly powerless. He had let his darkness touch her light, and in doing so, had nearly extinguished it. The grief he felt now was not the dull, hollow ache for his past, but a sharp, active agony for his present. He had found a reason to live again, only to have it torn from his grasp. Anger, cold and pure, began to replace the pain. He was angry at Sterling, at the jackalls in the press, at a world that could be so cruel. But most of all, he was angry at himself for letting Clara believe, even for a second, that he would abandon her. He had hidden in his grief for 3 years. He would not hide any more. He looked at the completed translation of the document on his desk. It was a weapon. And he was finally ready to use it. He called a press conference. The news sent a shockwave through the financial world. Julian Croft, the city's most reclusive billionaire, was going to speak publicly for the first time in years. The room was packed, a feeding frenzy of cameras and reporters, the same people who had vilified Clara. They expected a denial, a curt statement, a corporate damage control speech. They were wrong. Julian walked to the podium, not with the cold confidence of a CEO, but with the raw, heavy gravity of a man about to confess his soul. He did not look at his prepared notes. He looked directly into the cameras, into the eyes of the world. For the last 3 years, he began, his voice steady and clear, I have been living as a ghost. I lost my family, and in doing so, I lost myself. I existed, but I did not live. My life was an empty fortress of wealth and silence. A hush fell over the room. This was not what they had expected. Then, he continued, his voice softening, a kindness was shown to me. Or rather, to my coat. He spoke of the rainy night, of a woman who accepted a coat for her shivering child but refused anything for herself. I met a woman named Clara Evans. She is not a predator, as you have so cruelly mislabeled her. She is a woman of breathtaking integrity and quiet strength. She is a devoted mother who has sacrificed everything for her child. He held up a copy of the translated document. This was in the code I gave her. It details a massive fraud within my own company, orchestrated by my senior vice president, Marcus Sterling. Gasps rippled through the room. Clara Evans, the janitor you ridiculed, reads Old Norse. She translated this for me. She did not ask for money. She did not ask for anything. She did it because it was the right thing to do. His gaze hardened, sweeping across the stunned faces. You have torn this woman's life apart. You have harassed her, cost her her job, and terrorized her child. And for what? For a sensational headline? You attacked her character because you cannot comprehend a world where kindness is not a transaction. Where dignity is not for sale. Then, his voice broke, the polished armor of the billionaire cracking completely to reveal the wounded man beneath. You want to know the nature of my relationship with her? I will tell you. Clara Evans and her daughter Lily did not seek out my wealth. They found my soul. In a life that had become frozen and dark, they were the warmth and the light. She did not try to fill the emptiness in my life with money or status. She filled it with compassion. She taught me how to feel again. She saved me from my own grief. I don't just respect her. I love her. He stood there, utterly exposed, his vulnerability a defiant act of war against the cynicism of the world. He had not used his power or his money. He had used his truth. He had defended her not by hiding her, but by elevating her, by showing them all the quiet, magnificent truth of her character, and in doing so, laying his own broken heart bare for all to see. Clara watched it all on a small, flickering television in a motel room she had paid for with the last of her emergency cash. She saw his pain, his sincerity, his fierce defense of her. She saw him sacrifice his company's reputation, his privacy, his pride, all for her. The tears that streamed down her face were not tears of sorrow, but of overwhelming, heart-stopping love. He had not abandoned her. He had stood in the heart of the storm and commanded it to be still. When there was a soft knock on the motel room door later that evening, she knew it was him. She opened it to find him standing there, looking tired and uncertain, stripped of all his power and prestige. He was just Julian. I didn't know where else you would go, he said quietly. She did not say a word. She simply stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, holding on as if she would never let go. He buried his face in her hair, his whole body trembling with the release of a tension he had held for years. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry I brought this into your life. You brought yourself into my life, she said, pulling back to look at him, her eyes shining. That's all that matters. 1 year later, the world was a different place. Marcus Sterling was serving a lengthy prison sentence. Croft Enterprises, though bruised, had survived, rebuilt by Julian on a new foundation of transparency and ethics. But these were distant concerns for him now. His world had shrunk, not in scope, but in focus, centering on a warm, light-filled house in a quiet suburb, a place that felt more like home than the penthouse ever had. The laughter of a child echoed through the halls. Lily, no longer scared and confused, was thriving. She had a new backyard to play in and a man who tucked her in at night, reading her stories not about stars, but about ancient Vikings and brave shield maidens, tales inspired by her mother. Today was a special day. Julian stood on a small stage, not in front of reporters, but in front of a hopeful crowd of students, parents, and teachers at a community center. He was not wearing a suit, but a simple sweater. Clara stood beside him, her hand in his, a quiet confidence radiating from her. "My grandfather believed that language was a key," she said, speaking into the microphone. "A key that could unlock the past, and with it, a better understanding of our future. But for many, the door to that kind of education remains locked." Julian squeezed her hand. "The Croft Evans Foundation," he announced, his voice filled with a warmth that was now his permanent state, "is dedicated to providing those keys. To funding language programs, scholarships for forgotten arts, and ensuring that no passion has to be abandoned for the sake of survival." He looked at Clara, his love for her a palpable thing, a quiet glow that filled the room. His wealth had found its purpose. It was not in building taller skyscrapers or acquiring more companies. It was here, being transformed by her values into something meaningful, something that would last. His resources, her heart. Together, they had built not an empire, but a family. And in the quiet dignity of their new beginning, they had found a wealth richer than any fortune.